This week we'll review Margin Call, starring Kevin Spacey, Jeremy Irons, and Demi Moore.
There are three ways to make a living in this business. Be first, be smarter, or cheat.
Plus the new The Three Musketeers.
Let's even the odds.
And we'll go inside Roger's office for his review of The Thing.
If it makes it out of here, millions of people could die.
The real question is, who are we selling this to?
Same people we've been selling it to for the last 2 years, and whoever else will buy it.
But John, if you do this, you will kill the market for years. It's over.
Kevin Spacey and Jeremy Irons are in the middle of a financial meltdown in Margin Call. It's one of several new films we'll be reviewing this week. I'm Christy Lemire of the Associated Press.
And I'm Ignatiy of Movie.com. The financial crisis of 2008 and the bailouts that followed it remain a very hot topic of discussion. So it's no surprise that we've seen a glut of financial-themed movies in the last couple of years. Margin Call is neither the first nor the last of these films. It starts with company-wide layoffs at a Wall Street investment firm. Then, as the former head of one department is escorted out by security, he hands one of his subordinates, played by Zachary Quinto, a USB drive.
Be careful.
Its contents suggest that the company is actually worthless.
So, what you're telling me is that the music is about to stop, and we're going to be left holding the biggest bag of odorous excrement ever assembled in the history of capitalism.
The rest of the film is set over the course of a very long night as the company's higher-ups, who are played by Kevin Spacey, Jeremy Irons, Paul Bettany, Simon Baker, and Demi Moore, scramble to figure out what they can do with this information and what it might mean for their careers before the market opens the next day.
The formula's worthless.
What does that mean?
It's broken.
There are $8 trillion of paper around the world relying on that equation.
But we were wrong.
No, you mean you were wrong.
No,
The
don't get...
confined setting and stylized dialogue give the film a certain theatrical flair, which may be the best thing about it.
We are selling to willing buyers at the current fair market price, so that we may survive.
You will never sell anything to any of those people ever again.
I understand.
Do you?
Do you?
A film like this, with a large cast and a big subject, needs a clear, concise vision, a strong hand, and Margin Call just doesn't have it. The cast, for instance, is unbalanced. Jeremy Irons madly chews scenery, while Demi Moore looks like she's about to doze off. And though first-time writer-director J.C. Chandor has certainly done his research when it comes to the financial sector, his use of belabored metaphors and business movie cliches, the principled executive who does business the old way, the young innocent discovering the seedy side of banking, it all feels undercooked. It's a thumbs down for me.
Thumbs up for me. I like it a lot better than you do. And I do also like the theatricality of it. And it feels like a David Mamet play in a good way.
It feels like warmed over David Mamet.
But
That's the best
kind
this
of
film has to offer.
Faithfully so, in terms of the cadence and like the masculinity and the swagger and just the profanity of it all, which seems totally germane to who these people are, what they do for a living, and how they built their fortunes. So I believed all that. That all worked for me. I liked it very much.
There's a swagger to the performances. There's no swagger to the direction. I mean,
it's very low key. But I like that about it.
It's not low key. It's barely there.
But it lets these events stand on their own 2 feet for how important they are.
No, it doesn't
Melodramatize them at all.
No. I think it should be dramatizing them. In fact, it's actually detracting from the power of the performances. I think this film doesn't look terribly different from a 90s TV movie. I mean, to me, it seemed directionless.
But I like that they are all in this claustrophobic space and this confined time period, because it's a pressure cooker. And they're all stuck together,
there's no
and that
sense
creates
of pressure.
tension. No, absolutely it does.
I don't think there's any sense of tension, and I think this film has a really poor sense of pace. Even though it's a confined setting, a very short period of time, we're looking at about 24 hours, I feel like oftentimes you don't know where this film is headed.
It's clear from the very beginning where it's headed. The quiet horror on Zachary Quinto's face when he's like wow, what is about to happen here, says it all.
I believe that's what's called a blank expression.
Quiet horror. He worked on it. Next up is Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene, a tongue twister of a title that makes chilling sense as the film unfolds. It's one of the most startling, haunting movies I have seen all year. Elizabeth Olsen, the younger sister of Mary Kate and Ashley, stars as a young woman who flees an idyllic-looking but slightly creepy farm at the film's start. She nervously calls her estranged older sister, Lucy, played by Sarah Paulson, for help. At this point, she's known as Martha.
I'm sorry for calling.
Martha, please don't hang up. Don't hang up the phone. Find out where you are and I will come get you. Martha?
I can't wait that long.
Writer-director Sean Durkin seamlessly cuts back and forth in time. In the present, Martha is staying with Lucy and her architect husband, Ted, played by Hugh Dancy, at a peaceful Connecticut lake house. But Martha can't shake memories of the past from her years as a member of a hippie-ish cult led by a calmly charismatic John Hawkes.
Look after this girl. For once in her life, she deserves some real care.
I will. She's been great. Everyone's been really great.
Good. Martha. You look like a Marcy May.
Marcy was my grandmother's name.
Wow. There you go.
Eventually, both storylines increase in tension as the psychological abuse of the past and the paranoia of the present converge and collide. Lucy tries to understand Martha's standoffishness, her weird behavior, but Martha won't let her in.
Martha, I think the world of you. Sometimes I just think I should have come home and made sure you went to college. You had so much potential.
You know, I don't need your guidance now, and I didn't then. I am a teacher and a leader. You just never let me be that, but now I am. I know who I am.
The real discovery here is Olsen. She has a beautifully placid face that seems open, yet subtly conveys her character's inner torment. She's incredible in one of the year's best films. A very enthusiastic thumbs up from me. And a somewhat less enthusiastic thumbs up from me. Okay.
I have one kind of big issue with this film, and it's with the structure, you could say. It's almost like a striptease. It's this thing that you see a lot lately in movies. It's become very fashionable, where the film has a sort of secret at the very beginning that it hints at, and then it spends the rest of its running time kind of unpeeling layers, you know, doing its little dance, and then once it explains to you what's actually was going on in the first scene of the movie, it's got nowhere else to go.
But it's a device, sure. But if it's effective, if it works, if it builds tension, then why not? And it does do all of that. It keeps you hooked the entire time.
I'll give you that. This is a really cleverly made movie. I think especially in terms of the editing, in the way that it jumps, you know, from one timeline to another, constantly moving back and forth using these match cuts. Some really smart filmmaking and two really great performances. I think you're right. Elizabeth Olsen's really great in this. John Hawkes, at this point, you know, I would say is almost a national treasure.
He can do everything.
There should be park rangers protecting his craggy face. And he does really have that charisma. And the same sort of, I guess, charismatic menace, you could say, that he also showed in Winter's Bone last year.
And they're very similar in terms of tone, I think. It's something like the dark, kind of woodsy secrets that are going on there. I also like Elizabeth Olsen with Sarah Paulson, because there's no judgment as far as who screwed up that sisterhood. Just they're both trying to figure it out together.
I don't know. I feel like the film is fairly judgmental towards actually her sister.
You think so?
Yeah,
she's trying.
I don't know. Well, that's a different conversation for later, maybe. Up next, Sam Worthington in Texas Killing Fields.
Feel how close to the edge you are. I know exactly where I am.
But first, here are some movies now in theaters. Texas Killing Fields is inspired by the real-life murders of dozens of women over several decades. Jeffrey Dean Morgan and Sam Worthington co-star as a couple of cops in Texas City in the swampy southern part of the state. Morgan plays a transplant from New York who wants to go into this foreboding area to investigate. But Worthington, as the local boy, knows better.
This is us. Texas City. Debbie Mills. One dead girl. One unsolved. Clark County, the fields. It's not our jurisdiction.
Jessica Chastain plays a detective from another agency who is also looking into these missing persons cases and getting frustrated at the lack of help she's receiving.
By the way, you the one selling tickets here? Because I'd sure as hell like to buy one. Detective Stahl, why don't you go ahead and make a list of everybody whose footprints, fingerprints, tire prints, and hoof prints I might find on top of the real evidence.
One girl who's in particular danger as a potential target is the lonely and neglected Anne, played by Chloe Grace Moretz. She looks to Morgan's character as a rare source of stability in her life.
You're never alone. There's always someone looking out for you.
Who's that? God? I ain't got time for looking.
Texas Killing Fields was directed by Amy Kanan Mann, daughter of Michael Mann, who's a producer on the film. And so comparisons are inevitable, especially since she's made the kind of moody, pulpy crime thriller that he made his name on. The narrative ultimately feels unfocused, though, as all the multiple threads trail off in various directions. I wish the script had been tighter, but still, my thumb is up.
My thumb is down.
Okay.
It's not a very strong thumbs down, a mild thumbs down. I mean, this is a pretty routine police procedural with, you know, a little bit of regional flavor. And it's not terribly different from, you know, say a very arty episode of Law & Order SVU.
It does feel like a TV pilot, I will agree with you, establishing these characters in this place.
It's true, and it does a much better job of establishing the, you know, the characters than it really does of doing much with the characters.
I disagree.
And I'd say the crime is too vague. There are too many red herrings.
There are many crimes.
There are many crimes.
That's part of the problem, is like, you have to stop and think to yourself, okay, now which girl are they looking for? I can't remember.
I mean, there are many films that can make the sort of red herrings in an investigation really interesting. I think Zodiac is a really great example of that. In this case, it just weakens the film. I don't think there is enough at its center for the red herrings to really work. They poke holes in the film.
I disagree with your problem with the characterization. I mean, there is a classic good cop, bad cop structure here. Morgan's a good cop for a long time. Worthington's a bad cop. But as things get crazier, they do switch roles. And Worthington becomes the voice of reason, and Morgan goes a little bit nuts. And I kind of like that evolution in them both.
There are some good things. As I said, it's a mild thumbs down. You know, maybe on a different day, I might give this a thumbs up. Here's the setup. A spacecraft is buried in the ice to the South Pole. A body is dug out in a block of ice and thaws. Sound familiar? Let's go to Roger's office where he reviews the prequel to The Thing.
There's more than one way to review the new version of The Thing, based on a famous science fiction story about an alien visitor named Who Goes There. This is Bill Curtis speaking for Roger Ebert. The first way is simply to report on what it is, a high-tech thriller about scientists stranded inside an Antarctic research station with a creature from a spaceship who was frozen for many years but has now come back to life.
Do you really think that's a good idea?
Yes, I do.
Did you hear that?
The monster can take the shape of any of the humans, so they can never be sure who is friend or enemy.
For all I know, he could be one of those things. It is pretty hard to believe we both walked away from that crash.
Yeah, I get that, I do. But
we're preparing a test. And then we figure out who's who.
On that level, The Thing is a skillful popcorn movie. On another level, you could compare it to the 1982 version directed by John Carpenter. Both films use a great many special effects, but Carpenter also paid great attention to his characters and to the building of fear within the darkened spaces of the isolated station.
boom! Jeez. Screw you, man.
Or you could go back to 1951 and the very first version of this story, directed by Howard Hawks. This version had much more simple and basic special effects. It was much scarier because he used silence and shadows to create his suspense.
We can't let this thing leave. If it makes it out of here, millions of people could die.
I think the new version is crushed by the weight of its special effects. We see too much of the alien. He seems to be a collection of off-the-counter parts from the used alien store. There are times when the human characters almost seem like a prop. My recommendation? See one of the two earlier versions. Thumbs down to this one.
Thanks, Roger. Now, I actually disagree with Roger on this one, though I think this movie pales in comparison to the John Carpenter version. It stands on its own as a pretty solid horror movie. Now, our next film was not officially screened for film critics, but I was able to see it at a film festival screening.
I did not get to see it, so you are very special.
So you're only going to be getting my review on this one. The Three Musketeers may be the most ludicrous adaptation I've ever seen of Alexandre Dumas' classic novel. It also happens to be really entertaining. The basic premise remains the same. D'Artagnan, played here by Logan Lerman, travels to Paris and joins up with the Three Musketeers of the title, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, to thwart the scheming Cardinal Richelieu, played in this film by Christophe Waltz.
So, tell me, how many were involved in the altercation?
There were 4 of us against 40 of them, Your Majesty.
4 against 40? Or was it 400?
Just 40, Your Majesty. It was an off day.
That's pretty much where the film stops adhering to the plot of Dumas' novel, which last time I checked didn't have quite this many airships and flamethrowers in it. That's Orlando Bloom as the Duke of Buckingham, who's made into a villain in this version, though really he's being manipulated by Milady de Winter. She's played by Mila Jovovich, who spends most of the movie wearing revealing outfits and fighting people in slow motion. The Three Musketeers is directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, the man behind Resident Evil and Alien vs. Predator, and Jovovich's husband. Now, a lot of our colleagues aren't too fond of his movies, but I like Anderson. Sure, the films he makes are silly, but they're fun, and he's got a great visual imagination that makes up for some of his movies' shortcomings. If you want over-the-top entertainment that doesn't respect the laws of physics, you can't do much better than this irreverent, cartoony action film. It's a thumbs up from me.
Our next movie is Johnny English Reborn, a sequel to 2003 British spy parody. Rowan Atkinson is back as secret agent Johnny English, who thinks he's as suave as James Bond, but mostly bumbles his way from one situation to the next. Being tricked out with all the obligatory weapons and gadgets helps somewhat.
Don't! Here's what you'll be taking to Hong Kong.
Ah, yes.
Satellite receiver, tracking device, Semtex chewing gum. Now, what did I just say?
Johnny is back at the agency after several years with a bit of a stigma attached to him. Seems he massively bungled an assignment in Mozambique, and his new boss, played by Gillian Anderson, lets him know she won't tolerate those kinds of mistakes.
I didn't want to see you back. You are everything I came into this service to change. But my hands are tied. And there are times when one has to go against one's.
For his next job, Johnny must find out who's behind a plot to assassinate the Chinese premier. Even though he's been training in the remote mountains of Tibet all this time, it seems he may not be quite up for the challenge. That any of this works ever is a testament to the comedy skills of Rowan Atkinson. You can sense him slumming and straining, but he's so gifted physically that he makes some pretty idiotic material more enjoyable than it ought to be. I laughed here and there, but not enough to give it a thumbs up.
You know, I would say that slapstick is probably the most challenging kind of comedy to do. I mean, it takes the most from a performer, and it also requires the most precise directing. And I think it's really the directing in this film that really fouls it all up. Because you're right, Atkinson's a really talented physical comedian. And there are a few gags in this film that are just, on paper, they're brilliant.
Like what?
I think where he's in the meeting, kind of the big conference room, and he has the chair that keeps going up and down.
That is very funny.
It's a really funny gag on paper, but the film, it kind of screws it up because it keeps throwing in these reaction shots that, you know, are telling us that we're supposed to laugh, but they're actually ruining the joke.
And a huge waste also of Rosamund Pike, who is good in everything, who has this beautiful, strong, smart presence about her, and basically just has to show up and look good.
Well, there's a little movie called Le Havre that's caught Roger's attention. He's back in his office with a review.
The winner of this year's Chicago Film Festival is Le Havre, named after the port city in France. This is Bill Curtis, speaking for Roger Ebert. The director is Aki Kaurismäki, from Finland, one of my favorite directors. It tells the story of a young boy named Idrisen, who is smuggled into France from Africa. He escapes a police chase, and an old Shine man named Marcel takes pity and hides him.
Tu ne dois pas comprendre de quoi je parle.
Non, monsieur.
Ne m'appelle pas monsieur.
Vous ne vous êtes pas présenté.
Tiens, tiens, tu viens d'une famille cultivée.
Mon père était professeur.
Je m'appelle Marcel Marx. Tu peux m'appeler Marcel.
Oui, mon général.
Marcel enlists the help of his wife to conceal the boy.
Madame,
Oui.
soyez gentille et essayez de guérir vite. Je crois que monsieur Marcel ne se débrouille pas sans vous.
Je le crois aussi.
Eventually, the whole neighborhood is in on the conspiracy, which is a great frustration to a police inspector.
Quelqu'un de chez lui? De la famille?
Personne, seulement son chien. Pauvre bête, sa maîtresse lui manque beaucoup.
Eh bien, je vous remercie de ces renseignements.
Je ne fais que mon devoir. J'aime la société.
Kaurismäki specializes in downbeat, introverted characters who are usually losers in life. His settings are drab and shabby, yet his films are never depressing. There's always an undercurrent of dark humor and irony in them.
Son frère? Et vous êtes là pour vous moquer de moi?
Je suis l'albinos de la famille. Et pour votre malheur, non seulement journaliste, mais aussi avocat. Vous savez ce que dit la loi française sur la discrimination basée sur la couleur de la peau?
Je n'ai jamais...
N'aggravez pas votre cas. J'ai tout enregistré.
Le Havre is a rare, upbeat film for Kaurismäki. In a way, you could call it his first feel-good film. You could almost call the ending miraculous. Le Havre also won prizes at the Cannes and Munich film festivals. Look for it opening soon, nationally. Thumbs up.
Thank you so much, Roger. And this is Finland's submission for the Oscars for Best Foreign Language Film category. And it's lovely, but also so deadpan and just like the most depressing stuff happens, and yet it's hilarious. And it's also very sweet and feels sort of effortless.
It is very sweet. You know, I go back and forth on Kaurismäki, but I really, really like this one. What do you get when you combine a great band, a legendary music teacher, and Jamie Foxx? The answer is the new documentary called Thunder Soul. Let's check in with Chaz for her review.
Thunder Soul is a moving documentary presented by Jamie Foxx about the Kashmir High School Band in Houston. 30 years ago, the band won awards for its innovative big band sound. It was led by the dedicated music teacher, Mr. Conrad Johnson, whom was affectionately called Prof. Recently, the old band members were persuaded to get back together and put on a show to help raise money for the school and to honor the 92-year-old Prof.
We were called Thunder Soul.
We was the bomb.
It was the baddest band in the nation.
And they brought the funk like no one else could.
But they were just good. Not good as in good. Good as in God created the world to be good.
And the cool part about it was they were only in high school.
The band excelled in an era when most high school bands imitated Glenn Miller. Prof saw that times were changing and that young people were listening to artists like James Brown. So he made a bold move and allowed the students to incorporate funk and showmanship into their act. This was pretty radical at a time when Thunder Soul was the only black band allowed to compete in the Texas state competition.
You know, they'd have the trumpets, they would turn this away, one would duck, and the other one would bring it across his head. And they did that all the way down the line. Then the trombone players would put their trombones up like this, and see, it was more of a show then. It was a show band.
But the most extraordinary thing about the band was its leader, Prof. He stood in as a father figure and mentor to some of the students, and he taught them not only how to be musicians, but how to be men. He was convinced that musical culture and the arts were gateways to education and to their very lives. Under his leadership, the band achieved international fame.
It was not a standard to have an all-black band led by a black band director.
I had to teach them how to play funk.
He didn't just teach us the music, he taught us how to be men.
This movie is pure joy. You quickly get to know and care about Prof and the band members and their effect on the community. The community was so proud of them. And surprisingly, you learn that their achievements are not all in the past. The band was so professional that it was brought back on music labels over 30 years later. And no one suspected it was a high school band. This is a wonderfully sweet movie that reminds you how a caring teacher brings out the best in students. even in a gritty urban area of Texas. I give it a thumbs up.
Thanks, Chaz. And Thunder Soul, by the way, is playing in select cities.
Now let's recap the films we've reviewed on this week's show. A split vote on Margin Call, I'm up, Ignatiy is down. 2 thumbs up from Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene. Another split on Texas Killing Field, I'm up, Ignatiy is slightly down. 2 thumbs down on Johnny English Reborn. Ignatiy gives thumbs up to 3 Musketeers. Roger gives thumbs down on The Thing and a thumbs up on Le Havre. And Chaz gives thumbs up on Thunder Soul.
That's it for this week. Join us next week for more reviews, including the latest from the Shrek saga, Puss in Boots.
Fear me if you dare.
And Johnny Depp in The Rum Diary.
You can join us online at ebertpresents.com and on our Facebook page, Ebert Presents at the Movies. Until then, the balcony is closed.
The line between human beings and technology seems to be growing narrower every day, especially in thriller movies. Remember The Terminator with Arnold Schwarzenegger as kind of half man and half machine? Now you have the same thing in RoboCop with Peter Weller starring as a cop who was killed and then brought back to life with all kinds of artificial parts and computers to make him into an ideal policeman. The movie has a lot of high-tech special effects. It's an effective summer thriller. I enjoyed it. I give it 3 stars, and I'm Roger Ebert.
For more reviews and more from Roger's office, visit our website at ebertpresents.com.
This program partially funded by a grant from the Can Bar Charitable Trust.